from Mark chapter 12. And one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, "Which is the first commandment of all?" And Jesus answered him, "The first of all the commandments is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength.' This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is no other commandment greater than these." We often reduce this second commandment to simply love thy neighbor. While this is essential, the reference point that we are to use as to how well we love our neighbor is how we love ourselves. Love your neighbor as yourself. Today I invite you to turn it around and to reflect on the following commandment. Love yourself as you would your neighbor. You might say that embedded in the first two commandments are three important relationships, and that all three are necessary to leading a meaningful life. To love what is holy, what you would call sacred, what you would put before all else. To love what is human. And don't forget to love the human that is you. This sermon is about that last relationship, about how compassionate, just, and loving you are with yourself. In order to begin to evaluate this relationship, we must be able to say we truly know ourselves, including our gifts and our failings, our joy and our pain, our beauty and our ugliness, our longing and our fear, our strength and our frailty. This task of knowing ourselves, rather than the projection of ourselves, is not always as easy as it could be. The powerful projection of who we think we are or who we hear we are is created by the filter of what we have come to believe about ourselves because of our family, our friends, our assessment of what media and society are telling us to be, and our sense of ourselves in the interactions of playing or learning or working, and whether or not the current opportunities in our lives draw out the best in us or the best in those who are around us. This powerful projection and perception of who we are is not the same as who we are, or who the truest parts of our heart and soul would have us become. Or as Madeline L'Engle calls it, our isness. What is essential to our isness? Part of spiritual maturity is about gaining clarity about the difference between our projections and our perceptions of ourselves and what is real and what matters deeply to us, and learning how to act accordingly in the world. It sounds so simple. Love what is holy, love what is human, love what is you. But the voices inside our head that champion those projections and perceptions can create such a busyness, such a commotion, that it competes with anything going on our television sets or in the world around us. These projections prevent us from getting to the heart of the matter. Today, knowing who we are, knowing who we long to become, so that we might love both what is found there that could represent something of the holy, and what is found there that lays bare our humanness, our vulnerability, our soft spots. For how can we truly love what we don't know or understand? Some of you may remember a television show called Herman's Head. Did anyone else watch that show? Well, I was a senior in high school when one is particularly vulnerable to the voices outside of our heads when that show launched, and it made an indelible impression. The show was about a man named Herman and the 4 voices who lived in his head, who represented parts of him, but also the appetites and projections of society about what he should want and be as a man. Most of the episodes, as I recall, were about him learning how to sift between really the warring voices and what they wanted, and what he wanted and who he was. It was a sitcom, of course, because all of us can see ourselves in Herman's situation. All of us have known these voices at one time or another, even though the voices may not be exactly the same for any one of us. One of the great gifts of spiritual practices such as prayer or meditation or yoga or a hike in the woods and a chat with a babbling brook or painting or journaling and the like is the chance to become reacquainted with ourselves. Knowing yourself, your true self, rather than your projection of yourself, is that first step in learning how to love yourself. I love that story of Tiger, whose mood upon waking has the ability to bring all those voices into his head, to doubt the love of his parents, to doubt the love of his friends, to doubt everything, to doubt himself. And when he learns how to gently question that terrible, terrible tigerish mood, his final realization is that he cares for himself and loves himself, and so he won't be so subject to the voices, those voices in his head. Dwight Moody once wrote, "I have had more trouble with myself than with any other man." We are so much more than the voices in our heads, and sometimes so much less. The truth is often a different voice, a quieter voice that we need to learn how to listen very carefully to and to pay attention to. You are not what the voice of pride says you are, and who knows where that voice comes from. Maybe, and this might be a warning because I think we're still in that generation, maybe helicopter parents could be the voice of pride for some people. I am the best gymnast. I am the best gamer. The problem with listening to that voice is that our self-worth is rooted in being on top, and there's always someone who can knock us off, and therefore we're not worthy if we're not the best. Someone has the potential to knock off anyone. How long will Michael Jordan's legacy last? I don't know. But so much of what our self-worth is claimed to be in society these days is about being the best. Being the best. And there's a much better voice, and it is the voice of compassion. The voice of compassion yearns for all of us to have talents and to be a beautiful singer, and for all the beautiful singers in the world to bring that song into the world. And none is threatened by someone being a slightly better singer than another. You are not what the voice of greed says you are. Meaning, if you have far more than your share, many people begin to justify. Well, I have worked for it. I deserve everything that I have. Other people may not have as much because they have not worked as hard. Once again, we are staking our worth on things that are impermanent, on ways that we may be beaten, and on things that may one day be taken away from us. But on the other side, we are often more than what our voices say. You are not what the voice of anger says you are. For those of us that grew up in Generation X, that's me, the latchkey generation, we are worth our parents' time if we didn't have it. And if the voice of anger is a parental voice or a friend's voice or a spouse's voice from your first marriage, whoever it is, you are so much more than the voice of anger inside your head, especially your anger. So much of this story today is about learning to turn compassionate communication not just only towards the world, but towards yourself. Very often, this is the hardest one. And anger doesn't always look angry. Sometimes it looks like, I'm not good enough, the self-judging, I'm not good enough at this. And the voice of shame is another one. Often we are so much more than the voice of shame. And we are so much more than the voice of pity. I know that after I lost my father and my mother was walking in the world with a voice of incredible anger, inside me was the dwelling of a very strong voice of pity. Is my life worth it? The answer to that was yes, but all I could see was what that voice was telling me, that my situation was the worst in the world, which of course it wasn't. So often these voices isolate us rather than connect us to others. Again, the Buddhists would have us practice mindful attention to these voices and these feelings, and to notice, not only might I be talented in some way, like so many other people talented in the world, joining our lights of song, I also suffer. And my suffering joins in another kind of communion of song with the world, and that it's a part of being human. To have the potential to become ill, to have the potential to experience loss. I am so much more than any one episode. All through those bad days, as I told the children, we still have those lights, the light of love, the light of compassion, so many things. We are so much more than what that voice may be. So who are you? Ralph Waldo Emerson said, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. So many people want great things for us, but the question is, do we want those great things? This is a really big challenge for so many people. And if this comes easily for you, then help someone with the spiritual practice of listening to their story so they can begin to gain that same compassionate perspective that you have gained. Who are you? You are worthy. Because you are human, because this life is in fact finite, because you can love, because perhaps you are an artist in some special way in the world. There are so many things that we carry with us no matter what the situation. I want to return to the images in that story of tiger and tiger. What if our meditation today was loving thyself is like becoming the wise turtle? As opposed to tigerish's tantrum about the day, might we not seek to be at ease, really at home with ourselves in the world, just like the turtle carrying his shell on his back? And this gets to the next point, which is once you know yourself through a spiritual practice, through a deep sharing and discovery, the next step is learning how to accept yourself and your situation. Paul Tillich, a theologian, once wrote, the courage to be, that isness, right? The courage to be is the courage to accept oneself in spite of being unacceptable. Part of spiritual practice is turning inward and, like the tiger, laughing at ourselves, laughing at our frailty, laughing at the ways we've gotten it wrong, because it too connects us with many people around the world who get it wrong. The courage to be is the courage to accept oneself in spite of being unacceptable. And I think that it's important to say, accept yourself, and accept that whatever the situation you're going through is the situation you're going through. But that's not the same as saying you should be stuck in that situation permanently. It's not the same as saying any circumstance is permanently fine. And often when we look within and begin to see both our gifts and our failings, we can see a way out of a relationship that is not bringing us joy and fulfillment and completion, even if it's in recovenanting in that relationship. I know that the only way to truly love myself when I was hit with one more bit of suffering, I was in all that self-pity mode, and then what happened? I was questioning whether life was worth it, and I got sick. I was diagnosed with cancer, which made me come face to face with the fact that actually there were many things I loved about my life and about the people in my life. And now that it was threatened more than self-pity, I felt a great yearning to live whatever number of days were mine ahead to live as deeply and as lovingly as I could. That intention was set forth. And the only way through that additional pain was to accept it. Yes, I've had this terrible diagnosis. Yes, I'm going to have some terribly dark and difficult days. And yes, I will always have light as a part of those days as well, if I'm willing to see it. Part of acceptance is really seeing the fullness. So often we're either focused on what is painful and what is suffering, or we're trying to avoid pain and suffering. And as long as we do those things, we can never know ourselves truly in all different situations. So once we know ourselves and can accept ourselves and our circumstances, we come to a place where we can begin to see our gifts and to move forward in the world with all of those pouring out from our hearts. We begin to turn compassion inwards and say, rather than say, my worth is staked on whether or not I'm better than others. My worth is staked on things like sharing love or song, or my intellect, or my creativity, or whatever it is that is unique about me with all the others who ironically share that uniqueness. But the one thing by loving ourselves is we also recognize is that there is no other soul in the world that has our particular combination of gifts and talents. That each and every day we have is another opportunity to love those things into being in the world, and that if we don't do it, nobody will. And that whatever number of days are ours ahead to claim, that is our birthright. To uncover our light and to let it shine. That is the way that the spark of the divine lives most fully in the world, and that is the way that our humanness, our vulnerability, our soft spots is able to move the world towards a more loving and compassionate place. And I'll end with this one story. For a long time, I resisted the ways in which treatment had left my left arm debilitated. And so whenever I was in prayer with somebody, I would make a special effort not to touch them with that arm, because I always called it my good arm and my bad arm. And that's come to mean, for me, a kind of metaphor in my life. Loving myself is about loving my good arm and my bad arm, and maybe not calling it my bad arm. You might say loving my strengths and my weakness and recognizing how the two together make a unified whole and allow me to be a healer in the world. And so for a long time, I held back that pain and did not allow it to connect with others. And in fact, I would reach out only with this arm in prayer. And then finally, one day, I had such a gift. There was a woman who had a very similar kind of cancer. It's a very rare cancer. And for the first time in my life, I felt that I could show my ugliness, if you will, to her. And I touched her with that arm. I had short sleeves on, and I touched her place of surgery with that arm. And it came to me in a flash that I wasn't really just connecting with her because we happened to have a similar diagnosis, but that in effect, we were united in suffering and in joy because we had so much joy that we shared in common. Our stories were vastly different, but we loved our family. We had friends that were of great meaning to us. Who knows, maybe she was a singer and I'm a writer. But we were united in our suffering and in our great joys. When you derive your love of self from that idea of self-compassion, you can hold all of it. You are never knocked off the top. Your worth is staked on things that are permanent. So know what in you is your isness, is the substance of permanence, is the part of you that is the light you have to share with the world. Know the part of you that is your weakness. Accept those too. Accept that they are a part of your circumstance and allow them too to be gifts that help you bring more understanding and compassion in the world. And love yourself in a way that allows you to experience a communion of lights, a communion of song, a communion of joy, a collection as if there were 100 basketball players, or, because these are still somewhat unique talents, let's say if you're Michael Jordan, and you could have so many dream teams that it would be a good thing. What does it mean to live in a world where we would view that as a bad thing? No, it's a very healing thing. And imagine that is the kind of self-love that we then want to turn on others. It's the only love you can trust, because otherwise, if you cannot love yourself, the love for others only remains so long as you still feel good about yourself. And for a little while after, you may continue to give love, will begin to resent what you cannot give yourself. So this day I invite you into that kind of self-love. And to go home this day and look in the mirror, and I invite you right now to look on the front of your order of service, and to imagine yourself hugging yourself like that woman, which sometimes feels silly, right? This act of hugging yourself. And then to say, why does that feel silly? What does it mean to live in a world where hugging myself would be silly when it is the foundation for the love of all others? Go forth and love yourself and your light into being. Your isness is worth it. Will you join with